as well. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce one of our very own. Santino Lauricella has managed the education department for Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve since October of 2019. He is responsible for all facets of preserve programming, virtual and in person, engaging our visitors to be inspired by our natural world. Originally from New York, Central New York, he received his Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Management from the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. An avid outdoors lover since his childhood, spent just outside the Adirondack Park, he relishes all opportunities to share his very obvious passion for nature and science with others. And so with that, I will turn it over to Santino.
All right. Thank you so much, Pete. It's weird being on the opposite side of the introductions, which is fun. So just a couple of things to kick us off this evening or this morning. Note that anytime during the program where I'm quoting actual figures and numbers and straight data, know that those are my best guesses or estimates from the research, and I don't know how the historical numerical data things were collected, but everything you see here is to the best of my knowledge for accuracy. Also, other cliff note, there's a lot in 90 years, so I'm trying to do 90 years in 15 minutes, so I'm gonna roll real quick. So you'll see lots of text on the slide. Don't worry about all of that. Know that there's just a lot going on. So with that, kicking us off, Growing a Dream, 90 Years of the Preserve. There we go. All right, so first up, this is a map of Pennsylvania, obviously, but this is a geologic map. And why do I show that geologic map? Well, the geology of the preserve and the landscape around us is really why we're able to host so many different wonderful species here at the preserve. And just to give everyone a sense of place, this little box here is us in Bucks County. So many moons ago, the Pennsylvania was covered by a shallow ocean. We are also located just south of the equator, and obviously through geologic activity that our plates have shifted and the like. But during that time, many of the sediments deposited and compacted into rock, which we know as shale. Those that got compacted with all of the tropical plant matter as they decomposed became the oil shale. Many of us know that as the Marcellus shale formations. But where we're located, many of those fine sediments oxidized and reacted due to their iron and turned red. So the preserve, if you visit, know that we're filled with red shale all over, and that's how that was formed. Erosion sediments building up and oxidizing with the air. Now, fast forwarding quite a bit, more geologic activity shifted the landscape, and we had a giant magma intrusion or a bubbling up from under the earth. This created basically like a oven cooking effect. So if you imagine this, as my friend Bill Gavoda says, like a cake, right? The top layer is going to be that shale that's oxidized. We've got the magma from below, and that magma is heating up the rock that it touches. So as that magma cooled, that became our diabase rock. That heated rock that was just above the magma became hornfelds, and the uppermost layer remained as that red shale. So we had three different types of rock. Continuing on, as the geologic activity always does, we've had some more upswelling, some rifts, and lots of erosion. And so those different layers were eroded in different ways and amounts. And it's that erosion sediment from those three different rock species that produce the diverse, rich soil that we have here at the preserve. So this is where it all started. This is Pidcock Creek back in 1933. And at the bottom here, I just have a quote from Miss Ann Hawks Hutton, who was a very notable speaker at our 35th anniversary. And I thought it was very fitting. So the world is at any given time in the hands of the enthusiastic and the dedicated. And no truer words, I think, ring here at the preserve. So I'm going to run through some prominent figures of preserve history. You might have heard these names before, and some you might not have. So first up is going to be Wilson Heinich, who was a sales manager for Bartlett Tree Experts. I'm kind of mind blown that our association with Bartlett Tree Experts has gone back this far. He was owner of Vic's Wild Gardens Nursery in Glenmore, PA, but he was hired as a consultant for Washington Crossing Historic Park as they were buying up all the land that would be the Washington Crossing Historic Park, and he was actually our first warden. The next person that you might recognize is Mary Kay Perry. She was chair of the garden section of the Federated Women's Clubs of Bucks County and also president of Countryside Gardeners. This gal, Margaret Zatzinger, was probably one of our biggest movers and shakers. She, in 1933, was chair for the Council of the Preservation of the Natural Beauty of Pennsylvania. She was a very prominent and progressive woman. She was a descendant of John Shippens Buckley, who happened to be one of the first people to buy land from William Penn. She married a prominent Philadelphian architect and politician named Clarence Clark Zatzinger, and that really helped keep her in some upper echelon ties. And she was the one person who brought Heinich's proposal for a wildflower preserve to Thomas Scott, who was president of the Park Commission back in 1933. Miss Allen H. Reed, she was head for the Treeville Horticultural Society and first chairman of activities for the Garden Club Federation of Pennsylvania. And two other founding members I could not dig up too much information on, but we've got Miss Cornelia Ross and Elmer Holmes. Another big member, big founding member here at the preserve is Dr. Edgar T. Wary. He really set the stage for I would say basically everything that we have. The number of plants that we have, the data that we have that allows us to be a museum that really big, he kept meticulous records. So he was a chemist and mineralogist. He worked for the Natural History Museum and for the Bureau of Chemistry. He was professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He frequently gave walks, talks, and lectures here at the preserve. And he is super big into ferns, and he got that love of ferns back during his time at the Natural History Museum. Another gentleman, not one of our founding members, but very prominent in our history, is John Harshberger. He also frequently gave walks, talks, and lectures. And this guy I was kind of super impressed by. He built his own herbarium at the age of 7. He was one of the first people to recognize the threat that the chestnut blight caused. He's credited for coining the term ethnobotany back in 1895. And if you haven't heard the term ethnobotany, that is studying the relationships between humans and plants. And probably his most significant contribution was the monumental Phytographic Survey of North America back in 1911. It was a small 800-page document, but it was an early attempt to classify all the plant communities in North America. So like, no big deal, right? So jumping into how it all started. So 1917 is when the Pennsylvania General Assembly created the Washington Crossing Historic Park Commission. For the next 10 years, from 21 to 31, they spent about $25,000 to acquire all of the land. And the idea was to replant it with trees and plants that had been there during the Revolutionary War. They hired W. Wilson Heinich to be their consultant. And in the original intent for this land was for it to become park recreation for families to camp and enjoy. But Heinich had a dream. There's got to be some place along the Pidcock Creek that should be protected and preserved from intensive recreation. So he was trying to protect the landscape there. And over several conversations with his supervisors, the idea evolved into creating a wildflower preserve. So he happened to be walking along the mill race in 1933, I suspect about September, when he came across Miss Mary Kay Perry, and she was planting narcissus bulbs along the mill race. Once he brought his proposal to her, she was very much inspired and urged him to connect with Margaret Zatzinger, who again was chair of the Council for Preservation of Beauty Natural Beauty of Pennsylvania. Zatzinger was immediately taken by the proposal and brought it to her club in November of 1933. And he also brought that same proposal to Miss Allen Reed. And this is like what mind blows me is how quick this happened. So proposal to these gals in September, and on January 20th, Thomas Scott, president of the park, presented that letter to his commissioners. And in June, so not even a year, is when the commission accepted the offer for the Council of Preservation of the Natural Beauty of Pennsylvania to establish a wildflower preserve at the base of Bowman's Hill, 100 acres set aside specifically for that purpose. And here's a 1934 map of what our lands look like. And just to give you, this is a aerial view, just so you can see what those areas are, but the pavilion area, the entrance area here, some of our early paths, the Astor Path and our Hemlock Grove, which you can still visit today. So many hands make light work is truly, I mean, always rings true here at the preserve. Volunteers and others, we wouldn't be who we are without all of them. Dr. Wary and his team of volunteers planted hundreds of species and maintained meticulous records of where they all were. Roscoe McGill, who was park superintendent at the time, the budgets were really tight and he couldn't devote a lot of funds to the preserve, but back in 1934 said that 75% of his staff time had gone towards preserve projects. And we've got to tip our hats to the Civil Works Administration, the Works Projects Administration, and the National Youth Administration for all of the labor for our early preserve projects. So the early trail systems, by 1935, 3,000 specimens had been planted here at the preserve. Again, tip of the hat to Dr. Wary and his team. And Heinisch, because he was connected with the Civil Works Administration, he was able to get us a whole bunch of workers for special projects. And those CWA workers cleared the woodlands, built gateways and trails, built early parking lot, which was kind of the lower level lot from my understanding, restored the mill race and did a whole bunch more. And then as time progressed, the WPA workers built on the success. By 1940, in total, they completed about 13 trails and had 450-ish species planted here at the preserve. And if you're walking along the trails and you see those weird stone markers, those were WPA planted as, kind of the early trail marking systems. So again, here's just an overlay of that aerial and the old map with those things, highlighted pavilion, the entrance area here. But one thing I want to draw your attention to is the picking fields. So way back before we were into preservation, one early idea was to have picking fields for visitors to come, enjoy the plants, and leave much of the preserve land untouched. But very quickly, they found out how costly, both resource-wise and time-wise, it was to maintain. And so a new vision was formed for that area. And for those who visit, you might recognize that as Penn's Woods. So from fields to forest. So as popular as those picking fields were, they were filled with challenges. So in 1941, they decided to plan a forest, a memorial forest restoration project. And Margaret Zatzinger was chair of the committee. She led that project, and it would include more than 150 species of trees native to Pennsylvania, and it was officially established in 1944. So 10 years from our founding is when Penn's Woods officially was established. In addition, at that same time, 2 new comfort stations were built at the lower lot, and those were originally done with lumber from the preserve. And again, here's a aerial map, and this one has a slightly more up-to-date map of the preserve with that aerial overlay. But there's the comfort stations down there. You can see we no longer have our pickings fields. We've got Penn's Woods and some of our early trail systems named for some of those prominent figures, including Harshberger, Wary, and Perry. Another one of the most lasting WPA projects was the Chestnut Log Guard Cabin. It was built in the summer of 1935 and was the first projects to be completed. And you can see here on this old map, it was the guard's house. From my understanding, there was an old guard shack and the cabin replaced that and also served as residence for the warden, who, if you remember, was Heinisch. As we fast forward from the 1940s and the 50s, the preserve got ever more popular. More and more people were coming to the preserve, gained great notoriety. We were covered in various media outlets. But we had lectures. We hired our first botanist. We established a bird banding program in the 1950s. This guy here, Paul Fluck, Dr. Paul Fluck, the gentleman holding the duck, led that. And we had down in the lower corner, you'll see Pauline Buckingham, who was hired as our first naturalist. But all of this amazing growth was not without its challenges. We all go through growing pains. One of the first I think is cool is that we had a Cambridge elm, which that is a descendant of the tree that apparently Washington rallied his troops under at the preserve, and it passed away in 1939. Now, during the 30s to 40s, the Washington Crossing Historic Park Commission went through several different administrations, each with their own ideas about what the relationship of the preserve and the park were. And as time changed, there was a lot of miscommunications and just no one really understood that relationship well. And all of this got turned to a head when in 1946, Dr. Wary was threatened to be arrested for stealing plants by park police, which if you can imagine the guy who's basically in charge of knowing everything about all of our plants, they're going to threaten him. So he got very upset with that for this public accosting, and he removed himself for quite some time from preserve activities. But this really led to all of the folks around the preserve, outside of being absolutely just distraught, we really needed to find our place in Pennsylvania legislation. So after very heavy lobbying and championing, discussions beginning in 1947, over the next 2 years, in 1949, we finally got official status through legislation in the spring of 1949. So we are recognized as a true entity back in 1949. And that's Governor James Duff. Once we got official designation in the legislation, that opened us up to lots of state help. So the Department of Federal Works designed and built Founder's Pond in the 50s. They also helped with routine maintenance, creating trail signage, clearing the trails, and they are also the folks that helped us kind of build up Penn's Woods to what it is today, too. And in the 1950s alone, over 300 new species of plants were added to the preserve. One of the great ways they did this was via a mini habitats for specimens. And the idea was a brainchild of Dr. Wary, but in 1963, they buried bathtubs and amended those soils in those locations as a tribute to him and to help us gain some more species. We don't do that now. We don't bury bathtubs. And several new trails were added in addition to the Bucks County Trail, Azaleas at the Bridge, and Audubon Trail. And that trail was designed by Dr. Fluck himself, which I thought was really cool. Continuing on, as I said, visitation truly boomed and the preserve continued to be covered by several media outlets. This is just an excerpt from the Washington Crossing Park Commission's biennial report, and you're free to view that online. But I thought it was crazy. 1952, they quote us as having 15,000 visitors. By 1956, 75,000 people had come to the preserve, and 1960, 150,000 people. And as you can imagine, this crazy amount of visitation put quite a strain on both the preserve, its resources, as we were still only volunteer run in 1949. And this is just a quick zoom in of that. You can see celebrating our 25th anniversary down here. And this is approximately 150,000 people visit the preserve with 200 special guided tours. I thought this was crazy that it was quoted there. With all of the visitation, it was clear that we needed a real home for people to come see. Our headquarters had been the Thompson Neely House from 1930s until now. So discussions began in the 1960s. In 1961, it was officially made a capital project for the Department of Federal Works. And in 1964, our visitor center was finished at the cost of $75,000, which today is $750,000. And on May 13th, 1965, we had our official dedication ceremony. But shortly after that, renovations were being considered only 3 years later to make space for office, as well as to make space for a absolutely magical donation of Bucks County natural nests and bird displays, 250 different bird species. And this was done by Charles Platt, who gave us these species, which many of our say some of our old-time visitors might remember these bird displays, and they were in honor of his mother, who was an early and pioneering member of the preserve, and that official dedication was in 1973. And she was a very prominent artist. You can see a picture of one of her art species, and we have a book here at the preserve if folks want to check it out that has some of her art in that as well. Continuing on with more renovations and the like, in 1977, we became our own official entity with Bowman Wildflower Preserve Association, Inc. William Olson was hired as our first full-time educator, so it took till 1981 for that to happen. More renovation work happened on both interior and exterior of the building, so we got our brand new roof, brand new in 1986. 1987 is when we got approval for the building of a deer fence, that 2-mile exclusion fence to help protect our plants, and that wasn't completed until 92. And of course, we mentioned earlier on that accreditation, the preserve truly as a museum, which was, I don't think would have been possible without the work of Dr. Wary and all those volunteers who helped keep those meticulous notes. But that accreditation was led by none other than Janet Urban, who was the first trained manager here by PHMC. Now, she was not our executive director. We got our first executive director shortly after that. His name was Paul Teese. But at this time, we are one of 673 museums nationwide, one of 8 botanical gardens, and as still the only wildflower preserve dedicated to native plants. Still keep going on, fast forward. We became a nonprofit organization back in 97. We've had some heavy storms that produced heavy floods. Miles Arnott in 2000 took leadership from Paul Teese. And at that same year, we got our native plant idea garden, which are the lovely visitor center gardens you see as soon as you enter the preserve. And it was also at that time that Penn's Woods, which was a memorial forest, and they had kept continuing to mow and clear that land, so you could walk right up to the trees. It was decided that the mowing projects would be eliminated, and it really kind of showcased what a normal Pennsylvania forest with understory would look like. 2012 is when Hurricane Sandy happened. 2013 is when we got our new pond, which we still call the new pond today. So I laughed 10 years of being the new pond, but it's not the founder's pond. 2015, we got a renovation for our nursery and a new greenhouse. In 2018, we got our reaccreditation from the American Alliance of Museums, as well as the Aquatong Meadow areas, which greet you as soon as you get to the preserve. That meadow project commences. So it's in its 7th year now, which is pretty great. And that brings us to today. And this is the glorious team of individuals that I am proud to stand beside and work with each and every day. These fine and glorious folks really carry on the legacy of all those people that came before us, and we try our best to continue to build on the progress from them. And here's just a quick slide of our current stats, which is available, I think, on our website for folks to read a little bit further. And I want to give my hat, take my hat off and say thank you to all of the fine folks who I drew from and built upon for this program. One of the best is Peter Osborne, who's the gentleman up top here. He put out this beautiful book, No Spot in This Far Land is More Immortalized. I call it the Brown Bible. It literally covers everything preserve history, super detailed with references. In addition, I pulled some stuff from Miss Edith Taylor, who was associated with the preserve for quite some time. She did, for our 60th anniversary, put a history of the preserve from 1934 to 1994, and a lovely compilation. And of course, I want to give a shout out to all of the wonderful naturalists who've taught me from my humble beginnings here at the preserve. I joke, when I was hired, they asked me, what do you know about native plants? And I said, nothing, but I can learn. And these fine folks have done a quite number. Mr. Bill Gabota and Mary Nogami are who you see highlighted here. They are my geology and history buffs and are happy to answer questions. And some of you might have had a chance to take a history tour with them this past year. They were quite a hit. So thank you to them. And with that, I want to leave you guys with just one small quote from our previous executive director, Miles, that I think, I opened with a quote. This is another one that really encompasses the feelings here at the preserve. There is a sense of wholesomeness that emanates from this place. Countless others have expressed the same feeling upon visiting here for the first time and cite it as a reason that they return again and again. But there's something more, something deeper, some thread of goodness that's attracted good people and woven itself through the history of the preserve to the benefit of this special place.
Mm.
So with that, I want to say thank you all. And I turn the floor back over to, I believe, Pete.